Israel in Focus is brought to you by Yad B'Yad, Christians and Jews reaching out to take each other's hands.
Welcome to Israel in Focus. I'm John Sandager, your host, and on behalf of Sun Broadcasting, I want to thank you for joining us. And as always, I want to commend Sun Broadcasting, the legacy of Blackie Gonzalez and his daughter Annette, of blessed memory, and the family that's continued to support Israel, the state of Israel, the people and the land, and they've been faithful in that, and this show is a part of their production and a part of their commitment to that. With me today, I'm pleased to have Rabbi Nolan Lebovitz, who is the rabbi at West Los Angeles Adat Shalom. He has a wonderful story. I'm not going to give him a big background, but he was a film producer in Hollywood, and he now is producing films of extreme interest about Israel. Again, welcome, Rabbi. Welcome to New Mexico, and welcome to this program.
Thanks for having me, John.
You bet. So the first part I want to get to know, and I want my people to get to know who you are. You're a young man, a recent rabbi. The last time I met you, you were in rabbinical training, and now you're a full-blown rabbi with your own congregation. Tell us about Nolan Lebovitz. Where are you from, and how'd you end up in West Los Angeles being the rabbi of a growing synagogue?
I was born and raised in the suburbs of Chicago. I grew up in a suburb called Highland Park, and I was born into a unique family. All four of my grandparents were survivors. I call them prevailers of the Holocaust, of the Shoah. So I was raised with a very unique perspective in the world. I thought that was totally normal. I thought that was how all kids grow up. I went to Jewish day school growing up, and then public high school. And somewhere along the way, I decided that my path would be Hollywood. And so I applied to go to University of Southern California's film school. And people would tell my parents, if he goes to Los Angeles for college, he'll never come home. Mm-hmm. And my parents said, it's not true, it's not true. And I'd say, it's not true, it's not true. And then I went out to SC for film school, and I never went home. Yeah. Never went home. I ended up, when you, the first winter that you live in LA and you realize that it's not snowing, there's no need for winter jackets and whatnot, kind of changes your perspective on life.
Yeah, when I moved to New Mexico and I realized that in January it wasn't 40 below, it was actually 40 above,
right?
Which is an 80-degree span.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
So, so I stayed in LA and graduated from film school and began a career in the industry, and I wrote many screenplays and worked on a bunch of projects. The pinnacle of my career was writing and directing a film called Tortured. That was a horror, suspense, psychological thriller that was released by Sony in 2008. It starred Lawrence Fishburne and Cole Hauser and James Cromwell. It was a great experience. We made it up in Vancouver. Sony picked it up and put it out, and it was terrific.
You kind of went through that quickly. I mean, Hollywood is hard to break into. I mean, you hear all the stories, and you go to Los Angeles, and every white person, male or female, is a budding star waiting for a break. When did you graduate from USC?
2001.
Okay, so in 7 years, you went from a graduate, green as grass, to a producer, director of a major film. There's got to be some beshert,
right,
meaning meant to be things happening.
Right. There are a lot of meant to be things happening, but there are a lot of not meant to be things that happen as well.
Hard work.
Hard work. But Hollywood is a place where everybody gets up in the morning. Everybody wants to start making their projects. Everybody wants to work hard and get their projects made. There are only so many projects that are going to be made. And so a lot of it is networking. A lot of it is working with people over and over again so they build trust. And like everything in life, whether it be in a community of faith, or whether it be in Hollywood, in any industry, it's all about personal relationships.
Can you think of anything that prepared you for this? I mean, I think of, with great gratitude, my upbringing in the Midwest, North Dakota, the work ethic, the integrity, the honesty, so and so, which I perceived was in your family. Maybe subconsciously, did you realize that, boy, my folks taught me how to be a good student, a good worker? Is there something you connect there?
My parents taught me everything.
Yeah.
Everything. I owe so much of who I am to my parents and grandparents.
That's what I wanted to hear.
It's the foundation of who I am and what I believe and my identity. And I really believed when I entered rabbinical school that those 9 or 10 years or so that I was in Hollywood was in Jewish people would say falling off the derech, or falling off the path, right?
Okay.
It was a detour. It was a wrong way decision.
My son has gone to Hollywood.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But the truth is that when I began rabbinical school, and I really believed that for the first couple of years, I had to let go. And sometime in the second year of rabbinical school is when, at the Ziegler School at American Jewish University, I was studying to be a conservative rabbi. Sometime during the second year, I decided to begin making my first documentary, Roadmap Genesis, and marry my two passions of Torah and filmmaking together. And it was at that time that I realized that the previous career that I had had wasn't a detour. It was all part of the plan. It was just a plan that I could not see from my perspective.
It was, had you said, Mom and Dad, I think I want to be a rabbi, but I think the best thing I can do to get there would be to go to film school.
You
never would have thought of that.
Right. Not only my parents, but there's nobody who would have thought of that.
Maybe
right?
Hashem,
that's right.
God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob said, okay, I got some training for you.
Right.
And you and I talked about this before, how I think it's wonderful when a young man or woman goes to a Bible college, in the Christian world, a Bible college, goes to seminary, and then becomes a pastor or works in the ministry. But I've also seen very effective pastor, teachers, ministry leaders who have world life experiences.
That's right.
Some not so good, but some that have been training. Before we get into the film thing, so you met your wonderful wife, who happens to be in the audience, and if we really were smart, we'd have her sitting there, and she would be the star of the show.
Your ratings would go up.
Yes,
that's exactly
right.
right.
You and I both overmarried.
That's right.
And
That's
proud
exactly
of it.
right.
Yeah. So she married you when you were in filmmaking, right?
That's right.
Hollywood filmmaking. And then did you come home and say, oh, by the way, honey, I think I want to be a rabbi? Or how did that happen? That's the personal part I want to know.
Right. So I don't think it was a singular moment like that. Although when I shorten the story, it becomes a singular moment. I think that for a period of time, we were married. We were blessed to have our first daughter. All of our kids are a blessing. Now we have 3. We were in our first home, and I really began to think, was I put on this earth to wake up every morning and pitch horror film ideas? Is that what I was supposed to do?
Okay. Which is not bad, or
no.
That's not judgmental, but maybe I remember when I was holding my first child and I'm thinking, I really want to do what's right for you and I want you to be proud of Daddy. So there's a little click that happens
when you become
in your
a father.
heart.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so I think that my wife Blair began to recognize that there was a thoughtful process, a transition, a reflection that began. I think that the moment when I said to her, I think I'm going to apply to rabbinical school, to Ziegler, I think that she wasn't surprised, and at the same time, it was an expression on her face, just like yours now, except without the smile, maybe.
Yeah,
right.
Okay.
This is where this is led, right?
Okay,
exactly.
we have a child, we have a mortgage, and we're going to school, and I know Hollywood pays well, and so success is a financial success as well, not just. So I'm sure you had to make some adjustments.
We made adjustments. I mean, there are a lot of adjustments involved, not only financial in terms of going back to school full time.
Right.
And this was a 5-year program.
Oh.
But to her credit, as I talk about all the time, Blair was always supportive, and she was most supportive about the 3rd year of our rabbinical school training, which happens in Jerusalem.
Oh.
So most students in my position who are married or who already have a family with children, they can apply, maybe not for an entire exemption, but for a half exemption or for a partial exemption.
Get a waiver or
a
something?
waiver, right, exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Because it's difficult to leave your family for a period of time, especially if your wife works, kids are in school, all these things are considered. We decided to jump into the water, both of us with both feet in. We moved to Jerusalem for the year. We got an apartment. We took the children. We put them in school in Jerusalem. And I think that it was one of the best experiences of our lives.
While you're in Jerusalem, you're there to be studying for the rabbinical. And are you taking Hebrew? Why do they send you to, I mean, I've been to Israel and been to Jerusalem, and that's life-changing. We've talked about that with my audience. If you haven't gone, make it happen. But we'll talk about that more later. I can see the purpose for it, but what did you do there? What were you focused on that year?
So you're asking a profound question. The question is, at its core, what can be taught in Jerusalem that can't be taught in Los Angeles when we're surrounded by an amazing faculty at the Ziegler School? Is the text different? Is the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible different? Is the teaching of Talmud different? Is Midrash, Hebrew, any of these things different? The answer really is no. The texts don't change. The teaching doesn't change. What changes is that you are surrounded in the exact atmosphere by the people for thousands of years who either lived in those places or who dreamt of returning to those places. And Jerusalem itself exudes its own identity. And it is during that year that we are lucky enough to receive the opportunity to soak that up, to allow that to inform our Jewish identity. And I think that any Jewish identity, I'll go as far as to be bold and say, I think any identity of faith at all
Agreed.
that does not include Jerusalem and Israel is one with an element missing.
The first time I went to Israel, and I grew up in North Dakota in a Lutheran church, and lived in Albuquerque 47 years. I knew and studied the Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament. And I knew every story of Isaac and Moses and everything.
Right.
And of course the New Testament stories of Jesus and the apostles and so on and so forth. But when I walked there, and it wasn't so much the shrines and that stuff, it was just to realize that I'm walking on stones that David, Solomon, Jesus, apostles, etc. It's like all of a sudden you're absorbing this. It's not just the culture, it's not just the scenery, it's not just the artifacts, it's the life that goes back 3,000 years. I mean, David established Jerusalem as the capital about 1000 BC, BCE, and that's 3,000 years. And it's just like it comes up through you.
It envelops you.
Yeah, that's the word.
Right, it envelops you. So I tell people this story all the time. My wife and I would bring the kids to the Western Wall. In Hebrew, we call it the Kotel. And we would pray there on Friday mornings before the Sabbath would come in. We didn't go every week, but we went many, many weeks. We tried to go as often as possible on Fridays. And if you go on Fridays, like I did, you begin to recognize there are people who travel to Jerusalem from all over the world. Every continent in the world, people travel to see what is so special about the spiritual capital of the world.
And you're standing there listening to the United
Nations. Every language in the world, right?
Yes.
Every language, every tour group comes with their own colored hats and flags, and they walk through and they take pictures, and it's entertaining and it's exciting, and I am so appreciative that people support Israel and Jerusalem through tourism. But there are really only two groups that come to Jerusalem, come to the Western Wall, and cry. And those groups are Jews and Christians. Because when they're walking on those stones, they're not looking at an art museum. They're not looking at something on display from thousands of years ago that they find interesting. Every stone there is a piece of our soul, and it resonates deep within us. And I think that traveling to Jerusalem and having those experiences opened my eyes not only to how important Jerusalem is to our identity, but how important this relationship is between Jews and Christians around the world.
When you stand in that open area facing the wall, and for the audience, I'm sure 90% of you know what we're talking about. The wall that is the part of the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is, what is that, 60 feet up, 50? I don't know. It's high.
Right.
And that's where the temple used to be.
The temple used to stand on top of that.
On top of the wall. So you have what is the original wall, and the stones are the size. They're huge, and they've been there for 3,000 years. And there's a presence there. And it's not goofy and weird. It's just a sense of, I have had friends of mine, my father was in World War II, who visited the cemeteries on the beaches of Normandy.
Right.
There's something there.
Right.
And so that's a part of, and as we get into the second segment, we're going to talk about how you took that appreciation. So you were there for a year.
Right.
And came back and finished up your rabbinical studies.
Right.
And now you are a full-time rabbi. And when we come back, we'll talk about that whole part of it. But
Terrific.
In the 30 seconds or so that we have, how important, again, was that Israel trip to what you're doing now as a rabbi? We'll talk about filmmaker later.
I don't need 30 seconds to say essential.
Essential.
Essential. And
Okay.
I think that Israel and Jerusalem are essential to who I am and the way that I look at the world.
We'll be back to find out about where Jerusalem, the rabbinical, has taken Rabbi Nolan Lebovitz. Join us when we return. Welcome back to Israel in Focus. John Sandager, your host, and my guest today is Rabbi Nolan Lebovitz, who we've learned about his background, how he became a rabbi, how he's in the film school. And you mentioned, and I kind of cut you off because I wanted to save it for this segment, you took some of your film training and combined it with your calling, my term, for the rabbinical leadership and developed a film called Roadmap Genesis, which we showed in Albuquerque some time ago. It was spectacular. Tell us about that part of your life, transitioning and combining that training, experience, background in filmmaking with your rabbinical, may I call it, spiritual world.
Right. So it felt totally natural to me. Combining those two aspects of my life felt like this is what I was really meant to do. And the amazing part of the process, Roadmap Genesis or Roadmap Jerusalem, which is the project that I'm in New Mexico for here right now promoting, is that the camera allows me to learn about the world and to learn about people, to meet people, to encounter experiences that I never would be able to without the camera. So if you think about the Venn diagram of people who have sat in Alan Dershowitz's office in Harvard Law School while he was a professor there, and people who have spent time with Ken Ham at the Creation Museum in Kentucky, I believe that there's only one person in the overlap of those two in the Venn diagram, and that's me.
That's fascinating.
And I think that whether it be meeting with Mike Huckabee, spending time with Rabbi David Wolpe, these are all amazing experiences that I appreciate and that I receive as an opportunity as a result of my ability to make these documentaries. Traveling around the country promoting Roadmap Genesis taught me an important lesson, and that is that each and every community that I enter that screens the film has their own quirks, let's just say.
Shtick.
Shtick. Shtick is the word that I wanted to say,
You
right?
can use
Right?
it.
Right? So they each have their own quirks. But we're all people. And we have so much in common. People around this country have so much in common.
And we need to hear that.
And people don't understand it because they watch the news and they watch and they read whatever they read. And all of that media is intended to be divisive. All of that media attacks wedge issues and wants to divide us into categories, be it liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, whatever it is that their agenda is. But that's not my agenda. And that's not what I've learned at all. What I've learned is that every synagogue and church that I have entered has been warm and gracious and welcoming and have been filled with good people who want to live a life of morality and dignity and supporting the right issues.
There is a division. There has been, and I'm unfortunately probably still is division between our faiths, Judaism and Christianity. We have, and I won't get into a big lecture about it, but there's a tremendously embarrassing and terrible history of Christian anti-Semitism and how those two words can be in the same, it's the ultimate oxymoron to me, conflict of terms. But through organizations like Yad B'Yad and through a radio, TV station like this, and through what you're doing, just meeting together, talking together, sharing together. I told you there was a fellow I had on here and they were working in the water projects with the Palestinians. I thought, well, there's a terrible conflict. No, you have a common goal of peace and have a common goal of cooperation, and I'm just so proud of that. So Roadmap Genesis, tell us about that, and then we're going to get into the one we're talking about now.
Roadmap Genesis, I traveled around the country. I spoke to 26 different leaders, different people around the country from the Christian world and the Jewish world about the essential message about how important the book of Genesis, Sefer Bereshit, is to American society.
American society.
American society.
Not just Jewish.
Not just Jewish, not just Jewish.
The Judeo-Christian ethic.
That's exactly right, because we share a Judeo-Christian narrative
We do.
here in this country. And our common Judeo-Christian values come from a common source.
Yes.
And I make the argument that that common source can be traced back to the beginning.
Yes.
Anytime that we turn our back on that narrative, on those values, on that beginning, we get ourselves into trouble. And so I'll just use one example from the film. There are 10 examples in the film. I talk about 10 different passages from the book of Genesis. One example is just to take the very beginning, Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? In that passage, we learn that our God is a creator God.
Yes.
Our God makes things. Our God produces things. When we turn our back on making things ourselves, when we turn our back away from creating things ourselves, when we try to simply create an economy by swapping pieces of paper, we get ourselves into trouble because we have turned away from a Judeo-Christian narrative that demands that we be creative and productive with the time that we have here on earth.
And Adam and Eve's primary job was to make the earth productive and to guard it, and I've used this before. They were trustees of the earth.
Right, to steward it, right.
To steward it. Trust. I'm being in the trust business.
Yeah.
They're trustees, and you have to do what's best. And I preached this at a Sunday service one time. I said, I don't care whether you're an environmentalist or not. We Judeo-Christians should be trustees of the planet.
That's always.
So there's a foundation. It permeates throughout our culture.
Right.
And you identified that, and that film is wonderful, and we'll talk about that some more. But
Right.
So that really broke through.
It broke through, and it allowed me to meet wonderful people around the country, like you and Susie. And for that, I'm ever grateful to the film and to the whole experience. And that began a process. So it's like running a marathon from speaking to my friends. I've never run a block, but I've heard from people who run marathons that it's really a tiring endeavor, and afterwards they don't want to run another one the next week.
I'm such a smart aleck, and
Yep.
now my audience is going to see this. Do you know what happened to the man who ran the first marathon?
No.
It was the Battle of Marathon. He was a Greek soldier. He ran from the Battle of Marathon, the 26.2 miles, whatever it was, to tell the king that victory is ours. He died.
It's like saying it's a good idea.
So there is
Right.
a lesson there.
Thank you. Thank you. So after making the first film, I wasn't ready to go and make my second documentary right away. I was exhausted,
Sure.
and I needed time. I graduated rabbinical school. I was ordained as a rabbi. I was hired at Adat Shalom to serve that community. It's an amazing community in West LA. You're invited to visit us. Anybody is invited to visit us. And I take such great pride in the welcoming, hospitable nature of that community that I'm proud to be a part of. After I began working there, and it had been several years, I started to think about what would be my next film project. And as it turned out,
the bug bit you
the
again.
bug bit me again. And as it turned out, we were planning a 3-week trip to Israel.
Okay.
And I began to think, right, how could I use this opportunity of being in Israel to make a film that would express what I thought was an important message about the centrality of Jerusalem to our character. I think that I began making this film, Roadmap Jerusalem. I think you have the trailer here as well.
Let's watch it now.
Why is it a big deal for the United States to acknowledge Jerusalem as the capital of Israel? Why does Jerusalem mean so much to the Jewish people and the Jewish state? And why must all of its holy sites remain under Israeli control? My name is Nolan Lebovitz. When I have questions, I search for answers.
Jerusalem, it's an idea. It's the place from which spirituality should come to the world.
Jerusalem is connection, all the religious, Muslim, Christian, Jews.
New tactics to delegitimize Israel have taken hold.
We oppose a Jewish state in any part of Palestine.
Those nefarious tactics have now been focused on the Jewish spiritual and political capital city of Jerusalem.
We'll stay to fight and fight and fight.
The UN's Educational and Cultural Organization voted Judaism's most holy sites aren't Jewish at all.
That's just as absurd as denying the connection between the Great Wall of China and China.
They understand that if they take out our heart, then Jewish control over Israel falls away, and perhaps even that source of spirituality and goodness that can come to the world can also fade away.
I started working on this documentary to help empower Jewish people to advocate for Jerusalem, to articulate its importance, to see our ties to the city through history, politics, and the Bible.
The Romans pushed those stones down from the top of the Temple Mount.
That's right.
And here they rest
That's right.
for 2,000 years.
That's right.
The Jewish state, like all other nations, is entitled to select and develop its own capital city.
What does Jerusalem mean to you?
Basically, it's home.
It's home. It's the center of the country that I live in and my favorite place in the world.
It means passion, it means life, it means contentness in life, it means a spirit, it's an idea which grows within people, and as a Jewish person it means a hometown.
Advocate for the sake of Jerusalem, so that all our children may know her.
That film was viewed in its entirety, and anybody who is interested can purchase the film. That trailer is wonderful. It doesn't do justice to the whole film because it envelops the spirit. And what I enjoyed about it most was the fact that there was a diverse group of people that you talked with and their expressions about Israel. I don't want to give it away, but please, you can purchase this film. There's information on this on the
screen.
On the screen, thank you. But tell us about, okay, you finished the film. You started it when you were over there.
I started when I was over there. I started it almost a year before President Trump decided to move the embassy to Jerusalem.
Okay.
So one of the driving factors of the film was, why is there this great disparity in reality? Why does everybody who visits Israel, including every dignitary and every tourist who visits Israel, sees Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel?
Yeah.
Okay, Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the Jewish people. We've never had a capital anywhere else. Israel's capital has never been anyplace else. And so I began the film thinking, well, why does this disparity exist? Why is it that UNESCO attacks Jerusalem instead of attacking Israel at large? There must be something so central to the place of Jerusalem in our identity and in our culture that that everybody else recognizes it, perhaps instead of us. We need to recognize it now. The other thing I saw is that in the 70 years that Israel has existed, thank goodness, we have developed so many advocacy groups to stand up for Israel. And yet, there's not a single advocacy group to discuss the importance of Jerusalem and to advocate for Jerusalem's place in our story, in our narrative, to stand up for truth. And I think that that's an important truth moving forward as Israel continues to grow and prosper.
One of the things that struck me when this whole brouhaha developed when our current president made the decision, which every president has said they were going to do, right, by the way, and you show that in your film, right, is that I mentioned to a friend who said, well, now is not the right time, it's the wrong time. And I said, excuse me, what if somebody told us from the United Nations that we really shouldn't have our capital in Washington because there's too much turmoil there and it sends a bad message, you need to move it to Albuquerque. Right. We'd say, nuts to you. We'd probably say it's stronger than that. Right. And every sovereign nation, every sovereign country has the right to name its, and I'll bet you if you asked the broad public, maybe we're not Americans geographically astute, but if you asked them, where's the capital of Israel? They would have said, well, Jerusalem, I think.
That's right.
And it's irrational.
Right. I don't want to give away the end of the movie.
No.
But I'll say this. What is the big deal about President Trump recognizing Jerusalem as the capital? The answer is that it's not a big deal. It is exactly what we do for every other sovereign nation in the world.
Yes.
We recognize Paris as the capital of France because France says so, not because we recognize it. We recognize London as the capital of England because England says so. It's time to afford the only Jewish state in the world the same right to name them place their own capital city.
In the minute or so we have left in the segment, were you surprised, and were the Israelis, to your knowledge or understanding that you've talked to, surprised that it did happen? Because it's been pushed off. It's been pushed off for what, 30 years?
Right. I think that there was surprise, happy surprise.
Yeah.
I think there was relief that a president had the wherewithal to acknowledge reality, to see the truth and to name it, finally, after decades. I mean, President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama all promised to do so, deferred it every 6 months during their presidency.
Congress has approved it. I want to say 1987. Was I wrong?
I think it's 1996, but I could be wrong too.
96, 97.
Right.
When Congress, our
right,
Congress, not a president, not an administration, said
right,
so.
Right.
When we come back for our last segment, we'll talk more about the film and how we can become involved in Israel. Join us when we return. Welcome back to Israel in Focus. John Sandager, your host, and Rabbi Nolan Lebovitz, who is with us, talking about his most recent film, Roadmap Jerusalem. It was aired here, and as I mentioned before, this can be purchased. The information is on the screen. I want to make sure that I tell the audience that this is a documentary, but it's not a travel log.
No.
It's interesting, it's fascinating, but it's a purposeful statement to say this is Jerusalem, and I want you to follow up on that. I think you've said it, but I want you to be very clear. Why did you do this film? And you said before, you started this before current administration approved the moving of the embassy, U.S. Embassy.
Right. I thought that people, especially American Jews, had trouble precisely explaining why Jerusalem is so important to the state of Israel and to the Jewish people. And so I set out to create a film that makes the argument, that teaches the argument why Jerusalem is so important to us along 3 lines: biblically, historically, archaeologically, and politically.
Okay.
And so I interview 3 people in the film who each are, I think, experts in each of those fields. Okay. I spend time walking around the Temple Mount with one of the directors of the Israel Antiquities Authority, talking about archaeology and history, how the city developed. I talked to my Tanakh teacher, the Bible teacher, right, from the conservative yeshiva where I studied in Jerusalem. And I speak to Dov Lipman, who was a member of the Knesset for several years. And we walk around the Knesset. This movie is not only an educational tool, I also think it's entertaining as well.
It is.
And so I do a lot of man on the street where I walk around Jerusalem and I talk to people about why Jerusalem is important to that particular person. Because I want people to connect to Israel and Jerusalem, not as an idea, not in the abstract, but to love Israel and to love Jerusalem is actually to love the people that live there.
Yes.
Because Israel is not an idea, Israel is family.
And that is said over and over in the film, and it's beautiful. The way
thank you.
People express it in their own way. They're not actors.
Right, that's exactly right.
You're just sticking a microphone in somebody and saying, tell me why you loved...
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's what comes across when we do these community screenings.
Yes.
Is that people sit in their home church or their home synagogue, and they watch the film, and they get to meet and encounter their family that lives in Jerusalem. And that's why it's so important that these community screenings occur. I travel around the country holding these screenings. We've had the screenings in Los Angeles and now in New Mexico and Chicago, and I'll be in Arizona later in the summer, and hopefully more places to come. The website is www.roadmapjerusalem.com, and you can not only buy DVDs, we'd really appreciate it if people bought DVDs, but you can also contact us to arrange screenings in your community. And I think that is really the major push here, is because people don't understand how powerful the film is until you watch it surrounded by people in your local community. And then you begin a conversation. How do we actually enact the values? How do we actually act out what we believe on a daily basis? How do we make a difference? And I think that is an important conversation that we begin, because it is about bringing truth out into the world. It is about saying that the truth of Jerusalem's place, not only in Jewish history, but in modern day state of Israel, is undeniable. And if we begin from that place, then all of us have the ability to rebuff these absurd statements that come out of the United Nations and out of UNESCO. All of us have the ability to help steer the conversation that is led by this amazing country, the United States, in brokering any negotiation that goes on between Israel and all of her neighbors. And by the way, for the vast majority of her neighbors, Israel's relationship with them is becoming increasingly better every day. Every day. And so the United States as broker, that role becomes less and less important in the brokering of a deal.
Right.
And it becomes more and more important in terms of facilitating the actual clauses of those deals. There's one group especially that's still left, and that happens to be the Palestinians. And it's going to be a complicated one. Every president has come into office saying that this is the deal, this is the negotiation that they've set their sight on. It doesn't matter if the person is terribly religious or not. Everybody views this as, you know, the achievement of their career if they could accomplish it. And I just don't want anybody to encourage a deal for a deal's sake, because there's too much at stake. There's too much at stake. For us, for the Jewish people, and for Christians all around the world, access to our religious sites is too important to be negotiated away.
And again, we don't want to tell the whole film, but one of the most striking things is the fact, historical proven fact, that the only time that Christians, and I'll speak for my community, have ever had access to some of the holy sites, the wall, the dome, etc., is when it's been under Jewish rule.
That's exactly right.
Not when it's been under British rule or Palestinian or whatever, or Jordanian, so on and so forth.
That's exactly right.
I think this film is not a political statement, but it's about politics gets a part of what do we do. So I always try and ask this. Here we are in New Mexico.
Right.
Not New York, not Washington, D.C., New Mexico. What can we do? What will this film help us to do if we are pro-Zionist, pro-Israeli supporters? And again, I always say, you may agree with Benjamin Netanyahu or not. That's not the point.
Correct.
We as Christians are saying that is a part of our heritage. What can this film help us do? What do we do with this?
Right. So I think it's not enough to simply recite the Psalms and say, pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Good.
Without actually visiting Jerusalem, walking the streets, and understanding why tradition tells us that King David wrote those words. It's not enough to think that God protects Jerusalem when we know that God protects those who protect themselves. And so we need to act on behalf of what we know is the right thing to do. And that means, sometimes it means calling congressmen, sometimes it means calling senators, sometimes it means writing letters to the United Nations, sometimes it means traveling, sometimes it's just across the street to the local synagogue or to the local church and asking your neighbor to begin a conversation or a dialogue about their perspective.
Or sometimes it's over coffee when the subject comes up, oh, that stupid so-and-so opened the Israel embassy and now we're going to war, and you're saying, without information, you're saying, yeah, I'm not sure why we're doing that and I hope it works out okay. This gives you the biblical, archaeological, spiritual, and political answers. Right. You can have a legitimate, intelligent discussion. You may not convince somebody, but at least you can help them understand. There are so many times that we are ignorant. And I've said this before, and I'm not picking on liberal media or any, there's a lot of disinformation, misinformation, disinformation, propaganda as it would, because there are groups of people who are violently opposed to Israel's existence, and Jerusalem kind of represents Israel.
That's right.
Yeah, the Gaza, okay, and the Golan Heights and Tel Aviv, but Jerusalem is the heart of Israel, and to attack Israel is most effectively done, I think, by attacking Jerusalem.
That's exactly. Jerusalem is the heart and soul, not only of the state of Israel, not only of the Jewish people, but of the entire world faith community. And I think that's why when Israel and the Jewish people control Jerusalem, when the Jewish state, when the only Jewish state in the world controls Jerusalem, we take great pride in making sure that its doors are always open to everyone. Because everyone should enjoy the source of that spirituality.
As you walk through the streets of Jerusalem, there's more than just the wall. There's all kinds of things going on in Jerusalem. But when you enter into that, I'll call it the courtyard, which is a large area. When you walk up to the wall, you don't feel out of place as a Christian. You don't have a kippah on, you don't have a shawl on, you're just an honest tourist. Respectfully, you approach that. And I'm telling you, I felt like I was walking into a temple. And it wasn't Baptist or Lutheran or Protestant or Catholic or whatever. It was just a presence.
Right. No, there is absolutely a presence of the divine that is undeniable in that space.
Yeah.
And it's not only been recognized by us, it's been recognized by every generation before us. And that is why Jerusalem was established to be the city that it is. But I have to tell you something else that we show in the film that's really important for people to understand, especially with the news, the media that they see today here in this country, is that I walk up and down the streets of Jerusalem with a camera, and all you see are people having coffee, riding bikes, loving life,
shopping,
living life, right? Buying tchotchkes, being sold all kinds of tourist stuff. The Jerusalem is a warm city, welcoming to all. Jerusalem is a place where Blair and I felt like our kids were so safe. I would argue safer than we feel that they are in Los Angeles sometimes. Jerusalem is a place where every person that you meet feels like family.
I have been in Jerusalem, and people watching. I have seen like 3 people standing talking together. One was obviously an Arab based upon his dress. One appeared to be obviously Jewish based upon a kippah, the head covering. And one was just a young person in cutoffs and sandals and long hair, doesn't matter, a young, wonderful, youthful person. And they are conversing just like you and I are, and there's no anti-Arab, anti-Israel, anti-Jew, anti-anything. Right. They're just people living together.
And when we lived there, life forces you in a wonderful way to interact with many different cultures in Jerusalem on a daily basis. And we're far less cut off there than we are here in terms of looking at the world through our own myopic lens. Living in Jerusalem allows you to have a world perspective that people sitting in the General Assembly at the United Nations lack. Because they go to a meeting and then they go and get back into their limousine and go back to their embassy, and they don't have lunch and dinner and are forced to ride in taxis with other people and on buses with other people, trains with other people, enjoy going to hospitals with different cultures, enjoy going to libraries with different cultures. All of these things mean that actually the place where I think that the greatest hope for peace lies is actually in the streets of Jerusalem. Not in the halls of politics.
Interesting.
It's actually because the way that, in the words of Micah, that one day all nations would come to the Temple Mount, right, and receive wisdom. That was Micah's dream for a world to come.
And the term nations, as used in the Tanakh, means non-Jews, meaning us, Americans, Australians, Palestine, everything.
Everything.
We as God's created children.
That's right.
All of his children will come.
That's right.
To that one place.
To that one place.
Not to Washington.
Right.
Not to New York, not to London, not to Paris, but...
Micah didn't know about Washington and
he
Paris
did, okay.
yet. But I believe even if Micah did know about Paris,
Rome.
he wouldn't have chosen those places.
Yeah.
He would have still chosen Jerusalem. And the greatest piece of advocacy that any person can do, whether you live in New Mexico, Los Angeles, New York, wherever you live, is to decide that they're going to vote with their feet on what is important in this world. And that means that instead of booking your next vacation to London or Hawaii, it means that you are going to encounter Jerusalem and Israel and learn and feel what is so special about it. Because so many people sit in church and synagogue, whether it be Saturday or Sunday, and read the words and say the Psalms. And I always encourage people, it's not enough to say the Psalm, you have to live the Psalm.
Yeah. There is an expense in going from Albuquerque to Tel Aviv, which is where the airport is, and to take a tour. And I'm aware of that. I'm not naive. But I would look at the audience and say, it's a sacrifice, but it is a sacrifice of a lifetime that you will look back and say, I wish I'd have done it sooner. If you drink one less cup of Starbucks for the next X number of months or so, you can start doing it and make a commitment to it, because it is life-changing. It is life-changing. As we leave, I want to thank you. And one more time, I think it's important that to understand intelligently, factually, etc., and to be able to have a viable conversation with yourself to start with. I mean, maybe you're skeptical. Maybe you're saying, well, I just don't know what about. See this. And then it's 27 minutes long, and I'm speaking to my Christian friends. A lot of times we'll have Bible studies in our homes. We'll have Sunday school classes. This is a perfect venue to begin that. You can show it at the Bible study or in your classroom, and then you can have a discussion about it and pray about it and go to the biblical references that you talk about. This is a tool that will be effective in your entire Christian walk.
And as I say after the screenings, if you like the movie, please buy the DVD and send it to a friend.
Buy several DVDs.
No, thank you.
And send it to several friends.
That's how we spread the word.
And take it to other friends of yours that may be in other churches.
That's right.
And because your endorsement, your personal endorsement of saying, I've seen this film and it's good. It was at my church and was wonderful. Rabbi, thank you for coming to New Mexico. Thank you for being here. We thank you for what you're doing, and we all will continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Shalom, shalom.
Israel in Focus is produced with the intention to bring a clear understanding of the issues and events that are taking place in Israel and the Middle East. Each week, join host John Sandager as he articulates the information being shared to bring a clear perspective to the complex issues influencing our Judeo-Christian values. For a copy of today's program, send $20 to Sun Broadcasting, P.O. Box 4338, Albuquerque, New Mexico, 87196. The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of the management and staff of Sun Broadcasting. Israel in Focus is a production of the Sun Broadcasting Company.